Hello everyone, welcome back to another fun Kumpy Studios tutorial. So today I am here to talk about colliders. What I have set up right now is I have my nice tile map drawn. I know that I talked about tile maps in a different video. I set up a character and I have a basic move controller. I'm not going to go too much into that, but it basically lets me move around when I press the WASD keys. However, I want to stop when I hit the fences so that I can't go out of the fences, and I want to go to a different area of the map. Okay, time to get started. First thing that we need here is, and this is something to be very careful about, you can't mix and match these. What you're going to need is you will need a boxed collider. Since we're working in 2D, we are going to use a 2D boxed collider. And you can see the green square shows us just what that boxed collider will look like on our object. If we want to edit it, we can click this little button right here, this edit bounding volume, and just drag it around until you're happy with the size it is. I was actually pretty happy with it, so I think I'm going to leave that alone. A couple of important things to walk through is one is trigger. So if it's not a trigger, that means you can shove other objects around. In some games, when you want to trigger an event, just when you walk over something, then that's when you'd use is trigger, and we are going to want to use is trigger here. Oops, don't need that. The other thing that we're going to need, and this is important, is we are going to need a rigid body. So I'm coming here, I'm hitting add component, I'm typing in rigid body. So if I try to add a normal rigid body, one that's not 2D, and I click on this, you'll see that an error pops up. Long story short, you can't mix and match your rigid bodies and your colliders. You have to have 2D colliders with 2D rigid bodies and not 2D colliders with not 2D rigid bodies. That's why I'm going to have to do rigid body 2D. Couple of things that I'm going to talk about real quick. We are going to freeze rotation on the z-axis. Otherwise, when there's collisions, things get weird. It's really fun to leave on, but it's not what we're going for here. One quick thing to note, down here we have different bodies. We have dynamic, kinematic, and static. And so what kinematic does is it means that physics won't affect it. You just have a rigid body, which is nice sometimes when you need to register collisions. After adding the rigid body in the boxed collider, you can see that gravity is still on. Which kind of isn't ideal, because then we can't move around the map. And if your character ever starts falling down for no reason, that's probably what's going on. Alright, so I'm going to set the gravity scale to 0, because I actually don't want gravity to affect my player at all. So if we run it now, you'll see I'm back to being able to move around, but my fence still isn't stopping me. What we're going to need to do is, as we set up our tile map, I think I added a couple more layers than what I had last time, and if you notice, I have a layer called colliders. This is just a basic tile map setup. This was auto-generated. I'm going to go and hit add component, and I am going to look for tile map collider 2D. All this does is that it means if you have a sprite that has a collider on it, this will activate it. You can see all of these little green squares just appeared. That means that now if I run this... Alright, so I screwed up a little bit there. You actually don't want your boxed collider to be a trigger on the player. This is one of those things that if it doesn't work one way, I usually just go, oh darn it, I should have flipped it the other way. But now, when I run my scene, if I try to walk into the fence, I actually start just running into the fence. And that's exactly what we were going for. Tilemap colliders are one of the kind of exceptions that I've found to needing a rigid body. One other quick point to note is that any child objects will inherit a rigid body component. This took me a while to figure out. I had to dig through a lot of Unity doc notes. All that's saying is that if I have a rigid body on my player and I start using colliders on other children objects that I have, I don't need to add another rigid body because it already has one. However, if you're having troubles with that, you can always be safe than sorry. It won't hurt to have another rigid body on it, but you should be able to get away without doing so. The next thing that I want to work on is that I want to work on doorways. If you look at my scene over to the right, I made kind of this tool shed. It's really basic looking, but it gets the job done. And what I want to happen is that when the player walks through this door, right here, is that they will be teleported over here. First, I currently made a door collider, so if you notice, I have a shed door. I left the boxed collider on it. This one I wanted to set to is trigger. If I go to walk towards it, It actually teleports me. You don't need a rigid body for this, because it's a trigger, and rigid bodies are what trigger collisions. And that means that as long as I have the rigid body on the player, I should be okay. However, on my shed to yard collider, I do have a rigid body 2D, and if you'll notice, I set the body type to kinematic, because I don't need to be able to push this around. I'm saying physics shouldn't affect it, but I want it to have a rigid body in case something runs into it. Not entirely necessary, but it's not going to hurt anything. Same thing here, I have my box collider set as an on trigger, and that just means that it's only a trigger, and it will not actually push my character around. Just demonstrating. Alright, time to go to the script. If you look at my game object, I have one very simple script. I have teleport player. I'm going to open that up in Visual Studio right now. If you're not familiar with how Unity editors work, the two ways that you can start giving them objects in the inspector is either by putting a public in front of whatever objects that you want to mess with, whether it's a game object or something else, or if you want to keep it private, then you can use serialize field, and if I did the same code, and I'm going to save this and head back to the editor, you'll notice that now it has a second game object slot for us. Code is very simple. This is another thing to remember is on trigger enter only works if you have your collider set as a trigger. We have ours as a trigger, so make sure that you use on trigger enter 2D because we're using a 2D collider. All of this collider 2D collision does is it gets us a reference to whatever runs into that object. So what I'm doing is I'm saying, okay, whatever object hit us, take that game object, my player, take its transform position, that's where they are. So move to is, I'm just setting the transforms equal to each other, and I am using move to is my game object where I want them to be. So all this does is I'm basically setting their transform from where they are right now to where I want them to be instantaneously. There's no travel time, there's no nothing. All it does is it simply, when they hit it, it just moves them to this point that I referenced with move to. Heading back to the editor, if you look, the point that I have for go to shed is this, it's just a game object, completely empty, there's absolutely nothing here, but it has a transform, and that's what I need. If you look at shed door, you'll notice that the one game object that I have is go to shed. That's the game object that I gave it right here. And that means that when my script runs, it will simply teleport the player from where they are, where their collider is, right here, and it'll teleport them to right there. Let's run it one more time. So now that this might make sense what's going on, when I hit that collider, it instantly warps me right to the shed, and it instantly warps me right back to what counts as the backyard. I hope you enjoyed my crash course on colliders in Unity, along with a little bit of tilemap colliders, and we kind of talked about rigid bodies as well. I hope you found this helpful, and please join me again whenever I make another video. Leave any questions or comments below, and I'll do my best to get back to them. Thank you for watching.